The scalpel slipped on the slick, crimson surface, the metallic tang of blood thick in Sarah's nostrils. 7 times. The memory, visceral and unwelcome, clawed its way back as she meticulously cleaned a barely perceptible nick on her favorite gardening trowel. 7 times that blade had plunged into her, each strike a brutal punctuation mark in a stranger's senseless rage. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her small suburban yard, the same yard that, just 6 months ago, had been an improbable sea of silent, watchful figures in uniform. A sudden, violent crack ripped through the tranquil afternoon. Not the sharp report of a car backfiring, but something deeper, angrier. Sarah's head snapped up, her gardening forgotten. A plume of thick black smoke billowed from beyond the tree line, staining the otherwise pristine Virginia sky. It was followed by a gut-wrenching roar, a sound no ordinary commercial airliner could produce. The unmistakable shriek of a jet engine pushed far beyond its limits. Her blood ran cold. She knew that sound. Knew it from the rumble that sometimes vibrated her hospital windows, a familiar counterpoint to the beeping monitors and hurried footsteps of the ER. This was different. This was a scream of metal and fire. Without conscious thought, her body reacted. The trowel clattered to the patio stones. The podcast droning from her phone died mid-sentence. Her mind, honed by years of emergency room crises, instantly leaped into action. Downed aircraft, ejection, trauma, the golden hour. It was a mantra etched into her very being. Adrenaline surged, banishing the lingering ache from the deep scars that crisscrossed her torso. She sprinted towards the back door, her bare feet pounding on the sun-baked grass. Inside, she yanked open the hall closet, her fingers finding the familiar canvas of her trauma go bag. It was a relic from her days volunteering with a disaster relief organization, a dark green duffel filled with more medical supplies than most small clinics. Her father, a quiet man who rarely spoke of his time as an army medic in Vietnam, had instilled in her a fierce sense of responsibility, a primal urge to help those in need. "When the screaming starts, Sarah," he'd once told her, his gaze distant, "that's when the real work begins." Keys jangled in her hand as she burst out of the front door, the heavy bag thudding against her hip. Her sensible sedan, usually reserved for grocery runs and trips to the hospital, roared to life. She knew the general direction of the smoke, knew the small public park nestled between the cul-de-sacs a mile away. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, and slammed the pedal to the floor. The closer she got, the more the air thickened with the acrid stench of jet fuel and burning vegetation. The wail of distant sirens, faint at first, grew steadily louder, a discordant symphony accompanying the unfolding tragedy. As she rounded the final bend, the scene that greeted her was a chaotic tableau of twisted metal, scorched earth, and stunned onlookers clutching their phones. The cockpit section of what was once a magnificent war machine lay like a mangled beast, flames licking at its shattered edges. Debris, sharp and dangerous, was scattered like shrapnel across the manicured lawn. Sarah scanned the scene, her eyes trained to find the human element amidst the wreckage. And then she saw him. A figure in a flight suit lay about 50 feet from the main inferno, tangled in the remnants of a parachute that had only partially deployed. Lieutenant Michael Raptor Evans. She recognized the call sign stenciled on a scrap of fabric. He was alive. She could see the faint rise and fall of his chest, the jerky movements of his limbs. But he was in terrible shape. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, bone jutting through torn fabric. Burns blackened his exposed skin, and blood seeped from multiple deep lacerations. Ignoring the shouts of the growing crowd to stay back, Sarah plunged into the scene, her go-bag held tight. "Navy pilot down! I'm a nurse! Clear a path!" Her voice, amplified by adrenaline and years of commanding chaotic emergency rooms, cut through the stunned murmurs. She reached Mike, her heart sinking at the extent of his injuries. He was conscious, his eyes wide with pain and confusion. "Sir, my name is Sarah, I'm a nurse. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" Her voice was calm, a steady anchor in the storm of his trauma. "Mike," he groaned, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah's training took over. Protocol, assessment, immediate intervention. She ripped open her bag, pulling out sterile dressings and a tourniquet. The heat from the burning wreckage was intense, the smell of melting plastic and metal stinging her eyes. She focused solely on Mike, her fingers working quickly and efficiently. A compound fracture? Arterial bleed. She applied pressure, her brow furrowed in concentration. That's when they emerged from the tree line. Two figures, their eyes not on the injured pilot or the burning aircraft, but darting around, assessing the scene for opportunity. They moved with a predatory stealth, their clothes rough, their faces hard. Cutter, the taller and more menacing of the two, had a wiry build and a cruel glint in his eye. Weasel, shorter and fidgety, trailed nervously behind. "Look at that watch, man," Weasel hissed, pointing at Mike's wrist with a grubby finger. "That's got to be worth thousands." Cutter's gaze was fixed on something else. The pilot's detached helmet, lying a few feet away, a piece of advanced technology glinting in the firelight. "Forget the watch, look at the gear. Cops ain't here yet. We gotta be quick." They started to move towards Mike. Sarah, her hands still working to secure the tourniquet around his mangled leg, didn't even look up. "Stay back," she said firmly, her voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge. "He's critically injured. I need space." Cutter scoffed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Lady, we ain't here for him. We're just salvaging. Now get out of the way." He reached out a hand towards Mike's wrist, his intention clear. Sarah reacted instantly, her adrenaline-fueled strength surprising even herself. She placed her body between Cutter and the downed pilot, a human shield against their greed. "Get away from him. He's a naval officer. This is a federal crash site. Help is on the way." Cutter's face twisted in rage. "You think you're a hero? You're nothing." He shoved her hard. Sarah stumbled, her hand slipping on the blood-soaked dressing, but she regained her balance, her eyes blazing with a protective fury. Weasel, his eyes darting nervously towards the sound of approaching sirens in the distance, tugged at Cutter's sleeve. "Cutter, let's just go. It ain't worth it." Cutter ignored him, his focus locked on Sarah's defiant stance. "I warned you." A flash of silver in the fading light. A knife. He lunged, his movements swift and brutal. Sarah cried out, a sharp, searing pain ripping through her side. The cold steel twisted. He didn't stop. Again and again, the blade plunged into her flesh, each strike a sickening thud against her ribs. She gasped, her vision blurring, her legs buckling beneath her. But even as her strength ebbed away, she instinctively fell forward, her body collapsing over Mike's, still trying to shield him from the onslaught. The pain was a roaring inferno, but through the agony, a single thought persisted. She had kept them away from the pilot. The sirens were closer now, their wails growing deafening. Cutter and Weasel, finally realizing the game was up, panicked. Cutter snatched the pilot's helmet. Weasel grabbed a small metallic box from the wreckage, and they turned and fled back into the woods, disappearing into the deepening shadows. Sarah lay bleeding out on the scorched earth, the acrid smell of jet fuel mingling with the metallic scent of her own blood. Mike groaned beneath her, his breathing shallow. The sounds of approaching paramedics and firefighters washed over her, a chaotic symphony of flashing lights and urgent voices. Her world narrowed to the burning pain and the fading light. Then, everything went black. The first thing Sarah registered was the insistent, rhythmic beeping of a machine, a cold, mechanical counterpoint to the dull throbbing that permeated her entire body. She blinked her eyes open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room momentarily blinding her. A wave of nausea washed over her, followed by a searing pain that radiated from her side. Dr. Ben Carter, a familiar and reassuring face from her own ER, stood beside her bed, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Sarah, you're awake, thank God." His voice was gentle, but the gravity in his eyes told her everything. She tried to speak, but her throat felt raw and constricted. Ben squeezed her hand. "Don't try to talk yet. You were stabbed 7 times, Sarah. You have a punctured lung, a lacerated kidney. You lost a lot of blood. You were in surgery for 5 hours. You're lucky to be alive." The words hung in the sterile air, each one a heavy weight. 7 times. The casual brutality of it sent a shiver down her spine, even through the haze of pain medication. "The pilot," she managed, her voice a weak rasp. "Mike, is he?" A flicker of a smile touched Ben's lips. "He's in the ICU, stable. You saved his life, Sarah. The tourniquet you applied was textbook. You gave him the time he needed. They're saying he's going to make a full recovery." A wave of relief, so profound it almost brought tears to her eyes, washed over her. It had been worth it. The pain, the fear, it had all been worth it. But the fragile peace was shattered moments later when Detective Miller entered the room, his face impassive, his eyes devoid of any warmth. He introduced himself, his tone official and slightly accusatory. He wanted her statement. His questions weren't those of someone investigating a brutal assault on a Good Samaritan. They were sharp, probing, almost as if she were the one under suspicion. "Miss Jenkins, why did you approach the crash site? Were you aware that it was a federal investigation zone? Can you explain your decision to engage with the individuals you described as looters? Did you consider that your actions might have escalated the situation? Did you touch anything at the scene other than the pilot? Move any debris? You do understand that this is an active crime scene and a National Transportation Safety Board investigation site? Your unauthorized presence has potentially contaminated evidence." Sarah stared at him, her disbelief growing with each question. "I'm an ER nurse," she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. "There was a man dying. My only thought was to save his life." Miller's expression remained unchanged. "Your intentions may have been good, Ms. Jenkins, but your actions have created significant complications for this investigation. We will be in touch." He left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving Sarah feeling not like a hero, but like a suspect in her own near-death experience. The sterile quiet of the room was broken again a few hours later by a different kind of presence. A man in a sharply pressed Marine Corps service uniform stood hesitantly in the doorway. He was tall, with a tightly cropped haircut and an air of quiet intensity about him. "Miss Jenkins?" he asked, his voice low and respectful. "My name is Gunnery Sergeant David Evans. Lieutenant Michael Evans? He's my brother." He had driven through the night from Paris Island after receiving the news. His face, etched with concern, softened slightly as he looked at her. He thanked her, his words simple but heartfelt, for saving his brother's life. For the first time since waking up, Sarah felt a genuine connection, a sense of gratitude that transcended the sterile environment and the cold suspicion of the law. But the fragile warmth didn't last. The next visitor was Karen Thompson, the hospital's risk management administrator. She entered the room with a practiced air of detached concern, a tablet clutched in her hand, and a thin file tucked under her arm. She offered a perfunctory corporate brand of sympathy before launching into a carefully rehearsed monologue that sent a chill deeper than any of her physical wounds. "Ms. Jenkins, while we are saddened by the unfortunate incident that occurred, the hospital must address certain procedural and liability concerns regarding your actions at the scene of the aircraft crash." She didn't thank Sarah. She didn't acknowledge her bravery. Instead, she informed her that her actions constituted a major breach of professional conduct and hospital policy. As a registered nurse employed by this institution, you are expected to adhere to strict protocols, particularly regarding off-duty conduct that may reflect upon the hospital's reputation and expose it to potential legal action. Your decision to enter an unsecured and hazardous zone and to engage with unknown individuals was a direct violation of these policies. Thompson's voice was flat, clinical, devoid of any human emotion. Sarah stared at her, her disbelief hardening into anger. "Karen, I saved a man's life, a Navy pilot. He would have died if I hadn't intervened. What about the hospital's policy on helping those in need? What about the oath I took as a nurse?" Thompson's gaze remained cool and unwavering. "Ms. Placent, Jenkins, while we commend your impulse to assist, your actions were ultimately those of a private citizen, not a representative of this hospital. Your subsequent identification in media reports as one of our nurses creates significant liability issues. Effective immediately, you are being placed on paid administrative leave pending a full internal review by our board and legal team. You are not to speak to the media under any circumstances. The hospital will be releasing its own statement shortly." "You're suspending me?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief, the pain in her side forgotten for a moment in the face of this unbelievable betrayal. "I almost died! I was stabbed 7 times! "Please focus on your recovery, Ms. Jenkins," Thompson said, her tone dismissive. "The hospital will handle the rest." She turned and left, leaving Sarah alone in the sterile room, feeling utterly abandoned by the very institution she had served with dedication and compassion for years. The simmering rage inside her began to boil. Meanwhile, Gunnery Sergeant Evans, having been politely but firmly denied further access to Sarah's room by hospital security, found himself speaking with a nurse who had witnessed the tail end of Thompson's chilling encounter. Brenda, a seasoned ER nurse with a no-nonsense demeanor, was visibly incensed. "It's disgusting, Gunny," she said, her voice low with anger. "That woman saved a hero's life, nearly got herself killed doing it, and they're treating her like she's a criminal to cover their own backsides. She's one of us, a damn good nurse." David listened intently, his jaw tight. The injustice of it resonated deeply with his own ingrained sense of loyalty and duty. He asked Brenda for Sarah's home address. Brenda hesitated for a moment, then scribbled it down on a slip of paper. "Someone ought to thank her properly. The hospital sure as hell won't." Outside the hospital, David found a quiet corner and pulled out his phone. His calls were brief, direct, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "It's Gunny Evans. Yeah, my brother. No, he's stable. This is about the woman who saved him. Listen up, I need to put the word out." A network of silent communication, honed by years of shared experience and unwavering loyalty, began to activate. Across different units, across different states, the message spread. They would not forget. They would not stand idly by. Days later, Sarah was discharged. Dr. Carter, his face etched with a mixture of sympathy and professional neutrality, helped her into a wheelchair. Every movement sent jolts of pain through her recovering body. As she was wheeled out of the hospital, she was met by a small but persistent gaggle of news reporters, their microphones thrust forward, their cameras flashing relentlessly. The narrative being pushed by the authorities and subtly amplified by the hospital's carefully crafted statement was one of ambiguity, of a civilian intervention that had, unfortunately, resulted in injury. The questions reflected this muddy portrayal. "Ms. Jenkins, is it true you are being investigated by the police? Did the hospital suspend you due to your actions at the crash site? There are allegations that you may have provoked the individuals who attacked you. Can you comment on that?" Sarah, under strict orders from the hospital's legal team, could only offer a weak, "no comment." She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly misrepresented. The flashbulbs felt like accusations, the reporters' questions like veiled insults. She retreated into a waiting taxi, the weight of the world pressing down on her. Her small house, once a haven of peace and solitude, now felt like a lonely prison. The silence was deafening, amplifying the constant ache in her side and the gnawing anxiety in her mind. She flicked on the local news, hoping for some clarity, some understanding. What she saw instead sent a fresh wave of fury crashing over her. A slick, well-dressed lawyer, identified as representing Derek Vance and Kevin Poulos, the looters, now in custody, was giving a televised statement outside the courthouse. His words were a calculated slap in the face. "My clients were engaged in legitimate salvage operations in a public area, as is their right. Ms. Jenkins, an individual with no official capacity at the scene, aggressively confronted them, asserting a false claim of authority over the crash site. My clients felt genuinely threatened by her confrontational behavior and acted in what they perceived to be self-defense. It is regrettable that Ms. Jenkins sustained injuries, but it is crucial to understand that she is not the unblemished hero that certain media outlets are attempting to portray." Sarah stared at the television screen, her breath catching in her throat. The audacity of it. They were twisting the narrative, painting her as the aggressor, the one at fault. A sob of pure, unadulterated frustration escaped her lips. She hurled the remote at the screen, the plastic clattering harmlessly against the glass. She sank onto her worn couch, the pain in her side a dull echo of the deeper ache in her heart. Suspended from her job, under the shadow of a police investigation, publicly slandered by the very men who had tried to rob and kill a defenseless pilot and had brutally attacked her. Had it all been a mistake? Should she have just stayed home, tending her garden, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding a mile away? The weight of her isolation was crushing. She was utterly alone. The night that followed was long and filled with fitful sleep, punctuated by sharp stabs of pain and vivid, unwelcome replays of the attack. The cold, accusatory gaze of Detective Miller and the detached indifference of Karen Thompson haunted her dreams. As dawn finally broke, painting the sky in hues of gray and pale pink, Sarah felt a profound sense of defeat. The fight had been too much, the betrayal too deep. With a sigh that hitched in her injured lung, she slowly pushed herself out of bed, her body protesting with every movement. She shuffled to the window, her hand instinctively reaching to part the blinds, half expecting to see the intrusive glare of news vans already camped outside her house. But there were no news vans. Instead, standing perfectly still on the public sidewalk at the end of her driveway, Bathed in the soft, early morning light was a single figure in Marine Corps service uniform. He wasn't looking at her house. He was facing outwards, his gaze fixed on the quiet street, his posture ramrod straight, as if standing guard. Sarah blinked, her mind still clouded with sleep and pain medication. Surely she was hallucinating. She looked again, focusing intently. He was still there, a silent sentinel. Then she noticed another one across the street, leaning against a parked car, and another further down the block. Her heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against her bruised ribs. Clutching the doorframe for support, she slowly, cautiously, opened her front door. A cool morning breeze rustled the leaves in her yard, and then she saw the full extent of it. Her entire residential street, stretching in both directions as far as she could see, was lined with them, men and women. Some in crisp uniform, others in civilian clothes, but all bearing the unmistakable aura of United States Marines. They stood in small, quiet groups of 2 or 3, spaced evenly along the sidewalks. They weren't talking, they weren't holding signs, they were simply there. A silent, powerful, protective presence forming a human fence around her small property. There must have been hundreds. Overwhelmed, her legs suddenly feeling weak, Sarah leaned against the doorframe, her breath catching in her throat. At that moment, a quiet, respectful knock echoed from her porch. It was Gunnery Sergeant David Evans. He stood alone, holding a simple, insulated thermos in his hand. "Ma'am, Sarah Jenkins?" His voice was calm, steady, his eyes meeting hers with an unwavering intensity. "My name is Gunnery Sergeant David Evans, Lieutenant Mike Evans. He's my little brother." Sarah could only manage a whisper. "Is he?" "He's going to make a full recovery. The doctor said you saved his life. No question." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the silent ranks of Marines lining the street. The Marine Corps has a saying, Semper Fidelis. It means always faithful. We don't leave our own behind on the battlefield, and we don't forget those who stand up for us. He gestured with the thermos towards the silent assembly. "My brother couldn't be here to thank you himself, so he sent us." The carefully constructed dam of Sarah's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, not of pain or despair, but of an overwhelming wave of gratitude and disbelief. She had been so utterly alone, so completely betrayed. And now, this. This improbable, powerful display of solidarity. David simply stood there, a stoic figure of quiet strength, allowing her the moment to process the sheer magnitude of it all. The arrival of the first news van, followed by a flurry of others, shattered the morning quiet. But this time, the reporters kept their distance, their cameras trained on the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing the stunning visual, a suburban street transformed into a silent fortress, guarded by an army of Marines. The narrative, as if by an invisible force, shifted instantly. The ambiguous headlines vanished, replaced by bold pronouncements. Hero nurse protected by 250 Marines. The story went viral within minutes. A beacon of unexpected solidarity in a world often defined by division. A police cruiser pulled up to the end of the street, its lights flashing. Detective Miller emerged, his usual air of weary authority replaced by a look of stunned bewilderment. He took a few hesitant steps forward, as if intending to, what? Order the Marines to disperse? He took one look at the silent, disciplined ranks, at the formidable presence of Gunnery Sergeant Evans standing calmly on Sarah's porch, and seemed to deflate. Without a word, he turned and got back into his car, driving away, a mixture of awe and perhaps even a grudging respect etched on his face. He was outmaneuvered, outmatched by a force far greater than any he could command. Miles away, in the sterile confines of her corporate office, Karen Thompson watched the unfolding news reports, her face pale and drawn. Her phone rang incessantly. The hospital board, the CEO, frantic calls from national news networks. The PR nightmare she had desperately tried to avoid had not only arrived but had exploded into a full-blown crisis, casting the hospital in the role of the heartless, bureaucratic villain. Her carefully constructed wall of corporate indifference had crumbled, revealing the profound disconnect between policy and human decency. For the next 48 hours, the Marines maintained their silent vigil, a dawn watch, that became a national phenomenon. They operated with quiet efficiency and remarkable discipline, a rotating roster ensuring a constant presence without disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. They were entirely self-sufficient, bringing their own supplies, leaving no trace of their presence. They didn't ask Sarah for anything. Instead, they performed small, anonymous acts of service. A section of her fence, damaged during the initial chaos, was quietly repaired overnight. Her lawn, overgrown from her time in the hospital, was mowed with precision. A female Marine left a bag of groceries on her porch, a silent offering of support. They created a protective shield, a tangible barrier against the intrusive world, allowing Sarah the space and quiet she desperately needed to finally begin the true work of healing. The pressure on the hospital became unbearable. The public outcry was deafening, fueled by the stark contrast between Sarah's selfless heroism and the institution's cold, calculated response. Finally, a week after the Marine's initial appearance, the hospital issued a public apology, a carefully worded statement that nonetheless acknowledged their mishandling of the situation. Karen Thompson was quietly relieved of her duties. The hospital board, in a desperate attempt to salvage its reputation, offered Sarah her job back, along with a promotion to head nurse of the emergency room and a formal public commendation. They also announced the creation of the Sarah Jenkins Grant, a fund dedicated to providing emergency medical training to ordinary citizens, a belated and somewhat cynical attempt to capitalize on the very heroism they had initially sought to suppress. The legal case against Cutter and Weasel, now facing national scrutiny and overwhelming public condemnation, became a swift and decisive affair. The video footage from bystanders, coupled with the undeniable evidence of Sarah's injuries, completely undermined their absurd claim of self-defense. They were convicted and sentenced to the maximum allowable time, a small measure of justice in the wake of their brutal act. Gunnery Sergeant Evans, a man of action rather than words, became Sarah's unexpected guide through the sudden glare of public attention. He helped her navigate the deluge of interview requests, carefully selecting one major network for her to share her story. When she finally spoke to the nation, Sarah's voice was clear and strong, devoid of self-pity. She focused not on her own pain, but on the importance of community, the bravery of Lieutenant Evans, and the incredible, unexpected support she had received. She became an accidental icon, a symbol of ordinary courage in the face of extraordinary circumstances. Weeks later, walking with a cane but her steps growing steadier each day, Sarah visited Mike Evans in the rehabilitation center. He was thinner, still recovering, but his eyes held the same spark she remembered from that chaotic crash scene. Gunny Evans was there, a quiet guardian at his brother's side. The meeting was understated, devoid of melodrama. Mike, his voice still a little hoarse, tried to express his gratitude, his words catching in his throat. Sarah simply smiled and shook her head. "Just get back up in the sky, Lieutenant," she said, a genuine warmth in her voice. A profound, unspoken bond had formed between the three of them, forged in the crucible of tragedy and unexpected heroism. 6 months later, life in Sarah's small suburban house had settled into a new rhythm. She was back at the hospital, thriving in her new role as head nurse, her leadership now infused with an even deeper sense of empathy and understanding. Mike Evans, after months of intensive therapy, was back in the cockpit, the roar of his jet a familiar sound once more in the skies above. Gunnery Sergeant Evans continued to mold young recruits at Paris Island, instilling in them the same unwavering principles of honor, courage, and commitment that had led his fellow Marines to Sarah's doorstep in her darkest hour. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her living room, Sarah sat by the window, a peaceful smile gracing her lips. Her house was no longer a prison, but a sanctuary, filled with a quiet sense of purpose. On her mantelpiece, alongside a framed photograph of her father, stood an aerial shot of her street, an improbable tapestry of neatly parked cars and the silent, watchful figures of 250 Marines. Next to it was a polished wooden plaque, a gift from Mike's squadron, the Black Aces, its inscription a simple but deeply resonant message. To Sarah, with our deepest gratitude, Semper Fidelis. She picked up a postcard from the coffee table, its image a stark desert landscape. The message was brief, written in Mike's familiar scrawl. "They say the sky is lonely, but I know it's not. I've got guardian angels down there. Fly high, Raptor." Sarah closed her eyes, a profound sense of peace settling over her. The rage had long since faded, replaced by a deep understanding of the enduring power of human connection and the unwavering loyalty of those who stand ready to defend their own. She looked at the plaque, then out at her quiet, ordinary street, no longer just a place where she lived, but a testament to an extraordinary act of courage and the unexpected army it had called forth. The memory of the blade, sharp and cold, still lingered, a faint shadow in the bright landscape of her life. But now it was overshadowed by another image, the silent, steadfast presence of 250 Marines, a living embodiment of the promise that even in the darkest of times, you are never truly alone. The scalpel in her hand, meticulously cleaned and now safely stored, was a reminder of her calling, but the true instruments of her healing had been the unwavering loyalty and quiet strength of those who had filled her yard that unforgettable morning.